approaching the network of crowds and the concept of people working together in broad ways, it came together from a point of view of technology more than anything else. You know, I grew up in a world which combined, like I said, like it was mentioned, the California Institute for Telecommunications and Information Technology, and then my love for exploration. Now, how do those two things link up, right? I mean, the California Institute for Telecommunications, and it's like it's a mouthful, right? So we just put this little acronym there, and you know, National Geographic has this sense of exploration. We say, well, what are the two connectors there? What is Cal IT2 about? What is National Geographic about? So I wanted to give a little background to where I work in a general day. It's a place that's obsessed with data, with understanding how you interact with data, with understanding how you connect with new information, with understanding how you connect with new kinds of people, with broad networks of people, with how that impacts culture, how that impacts music, how that impacts the way we talk to each other, how it impacts the internet, you know, the foundations of the internet. This is this place where really we just play around with this interconnectivity and try to look at what it means for the future, right? So telecommunications and information technology, it sounds very boring usually, right? I mean, it's like nerdy, you know, boring. But it's actually really fundamentally cool. It's about human knowledge capture, right? It's about human knowledge transmission. It's about human knowledge creation. I mean, this is basically what it is to be a human mind, right? And then how you lead to human action. So this is kind of the glorious way to look at the words of telecommunications and information technology. And it all started, you know, a long time ago with people like this guy, Alexander Graham Bell, who invented the phone, right? He invented the phone. He was a guy whose labs went on to create the transistor, right? The transistor which changed the whole world, which took, you know, what we're celebrating here and turned it into something that we all have on our desktops now, right? That same guy who started a lot of that, you know, Alexander Graham Bell, also really loved smoking cigars and drinking whiskey and getting together in Washington, D.C. around cold nights and talking about exploration. And that led towards him being one of the founders of the National Geographic Society. I didn't really even know that until, you know, later on. I mean, he was inventing telephones and hanging out with these guys, you know, thinking about exploration, right? So that's why when, you know, I think about the combination between telecommunications and information technology and National Geographic, it's core from the very beginning, you know. And what does telecommunications mean now? It means being able to talk to somebody from a distance. Information technology means creating knowledge. So that's how this whole network thing sat in my mind. And what I've been thinking about most recently is how do those connective pieces at a fundamental scientific level allow us to engage in the modern age of science, right? For me, the modern age started here, okay? Who do you think in that photo is me? It's pretty much that guy right there. Young boy, you know, you could see right away that I had a lot of tenacity towards whatever I wanted to do. And one day I ended up with a PhD in engineering, where I'm supposed to look very wise. I actually look totally confused, right? Like, I have no clue what's going on, so I decided to follow my original passions and go out into the world to seek, you know, what my grandfather had always said was our ancestral roots. And I ended up just getting rid of everything and moving out to Mongolia for a while. This is me living with some nomads on the plains of Mongolia. You know, people that I'd met on a train where I had convinced myself that if I had a GPS, my first ever GPS, that whenever I got into trouble, eventually I could get, you know, back to some kind of civilization and get home. And they said, well, you're going to die, right? There's no way. So they took me into their home, and they taught me how to ride horses, and they taught me about their culture, and they taught me about their people, and they taught me about this legacy of this one individual who had shaped their entire life, who had shaped their entire world, who in fact had shaped our world. You know, this guy, Genghis Khan. I think some of you heard me speak about him yesterday. For those of you who didn't, there's a guy named Genghis Khan from 800 years ago who, with a single army and in a single lifetime, went from being an outcasted slave, basically he'd been outcast to die in the mountains of northern Mongolia, And he came back from a single location and created an army of people who had hated each other and fought against each other for thousands of years. The warring tribes of northern Mongolia. And then he took those people and he charismatically created an army that went out and created the largest contiguous empire in human history. I mean, like, ever, okay? That's remarkable. And we know almost nothing about him. I mean, even the greatest historians around this individual describe him as being, in past nor present, has any historical figure excited greater admiration or fear and hate than Genghis Khan, but few such men have we so little detail or authentic information about. We've got nothing to base our knowledge on. And for a very specific reason, in that he didn't really ever leave any written documents about him from his own time. There was never a painting of him from what he looked like, from his own people. We have no clue of any material evidence of this individual other than his impact, right? And so the legacies that are left are kind of, written by his enemies. A lot of that physical knowledge ended up in a place, we believe, known as the Yugi Korek, or the Forbidden Precinct. This is a photo that was recently taken by our photographer Ben Horton from this Forbidden Precinct. And nobody except for shamans and the president of Mongolia and some of the dignitaries are allowed in this region. In fact, for 800 years, since the decree of Genghis Khan himself, it's been off limits. And we have no clue what's in there. We have no definition of what we're going to find there. We can't predefine a search because we don't know. None of these tombs have ever been found. Nothing has ever been found. There's nothing to base it on. So we took that original approach. It was that same aha moment. I want that helicopter, right? I want to be able to see. I want to start out from a big search area and go to a small search area. And that's how we had this approach where we said, okay, well, let's take satellite imagery. Let's start out with satellite imagery. And we were very graciously donated a bunch of satellite imagery from the GeoEye Foundation, which provided 0.5 meter resolution multispectral data. Now, 0.5 meter multispectral data is awesome if you know how to deal with it. When you've got 6,000 square kilometers of it on a rotating basis, through winter and summer and everything else, how do you define those pixels? How do you look for something that you can't even predefine? I mean, it doesn't even look like you can tell what a road would look like, you can tell what a river would look like, but you can't describe what this tomb would look like because we've never seen it, right? It's kind of like Where's Waldo? But the only difference is that in Where's Waldo, you know exactly what he's going to look like, right? So it's very easy for you to find Waldo. I mean, any one of you guys can find it, right? I think he's somewhere, well, actually, it's pretty difficult. But you know what? If we turned this problem towards a computer vision algorithm, we gave it a predefined marker, we trained it on a bunch of images of Waldo, it'd very quickly find it. Automated systems, right? Crunching big amounts of data. But human perception is still out of the reach. Human intuition is out of the reach of these automated systems. The ability to sense something awkward. Okay, this image was taken in the UK. It's, if you asked a computer to sense what's awkward in there, it would probably pick that fuzzy off-focus ball flying right at your face. But when it went viral on the internet, what do you think became the focus point of this image? That guy. I mean, he was basically flying around. I mean, his face was on a bunch of other images. They brought him around the world. It was a sense that we all agree that that guy is very charismatic in this image. But there's no way I could have predefined that. I couldn't have predicted that that would look really, really interesting. So how do you scale up these things? I mean, this idea of getting lots of people involved, which Patrick has been a champion of, right? But my interest in it wasn't so much around compassion I mean, it is, but that wasn't the driver. It was, how do you connect a lot of different minds around a singular problem to develop something that I would consider to be like a collective reasoning, right? When you can't predefine what you're trying to even reason with. How do you get those minds together? And for us, it was satellite imagery, of course, to begin with. And when we started looking at the data, we'd find things like this. I can reason with myself to some extent that those things are roads, and that's a river, and there's a modern structure there. But I can also see something else in that image. And I can see something else that to me, feels awkward. And so I wanted to be able to tag that, geospatially tag this. This was something that we built together with my team and National Geographic and a group called Digitaria. My team has since gone on to start this Tomnod group. In Mongolian, Tomnod, which worked with Patrick, Tomnod means the big eye, okay, in Mongolian. We said, well, how do you just tag these things, right? Okay, so you place your markers on this map. Great, you've made your contribution. Now, how do you develop a system that allows you to reason with other people but not sway your vote initially? So you can have a blind test, but you can start to learn from each other. So we said, well, why don't we then, once they've committed their votes, ask them to see what everybody else had seen around them, right? So you start seeing what other people have seen around you, but you've already committed your votes. So now you're starting to understand what other people are thinking about the same image. And since we can't predefine whether you're right or wrong, we're just hoping that as more and more people get involved in here, the conversation evolves to a collective reasoning of what this tube might look like. We put that online after a very exhausting and horrifying but awesome 3 months. Wonderful process of design and development. And our idea would be that we would collect this data in real time via a satellite link up to the field, and we'd blog back the ground truths of what people were finding whenever we would go to those locations. So we injected another level of feedback other than that collective reasoning. We injected the ground. To me, I was inspired originally not by tombs for this thing, right, or satellite imagery. I was inspired by something I saw across the plains of Mongolia, these bird swarms. Bird swarms. What does bird swarms have to do with this? Well, what I'm trying to do in collective reasoning is say, well, if you can make decisions based off of very controlled rules, then as an individual, you're contributing to the direction of the crowd or the swarm, right? And if you can do that in an effective way, then you can avoid catastrophe, or you can define safety. You can be adaptive, you can be quick, you can make decisions, right? You can change the group thinking. You come down, you make a choice, you get input from people around you, and then you go on to make another choice. In bird swarms, there's very, very simple rules. I mean, how do a lot of individual birds go and move around like a unit and make all these random decisions? Well, it's believed that those 3 rules are basically that you want to be, kind of equidistant from each other. You want to be able to not be too far from the crowd. I mean, you want to be like within that thing. So that's giving those feedback. You see that you're either within the dots, all the other clusters, or you're not. But ultimately, as a bird, you want to also be in the center of the crowd. You want to try to get into the center of the swarm. You want to be the alpha that's doing everything. So that throws in that randomness that redirects all of the other swarms in different directions. And that to us is that desire to search and find the tomb, right? So if you want to find it, then you're not going to only listen to the other feedback, but you're also going to try to be that marker, right? So we put that online. And before you knew it, people started coming. They started showing up, they started tagging the imagery, they'd see things, they would place markers on them, and one by one, we collected at first tens of thousands of data points, hundreds of thousands of data points. Before you knew it, we had 1.8 million data points, right? Now we've gone over to 2.5 million. And here's a little timestamp of what all those little data points looks like. So coming down in a sequence of time, you see all of them falling onto the map in different order. And at first it looks like noise, but then you start to see things emerge, like these roads, right? Or these rivers. Or when you look a little closer, because of all of these independent choices, they're making these collective arguments that there's something there, those little dots there. What are these little dots, right? Hundreds and hundreds of people independently pick that little dot, maybe on their first image that they've looked at, or maybe on their 100th image that they looked at. If it was a 100th image that they looked at, they had 100 other examples of other things that other people have said. If it was their first, it was them just trying to figure out what they're doing. But they agreed, not knowing they were going to agree. So we wanted to go and check out these sites, right? So we loaded up the big trucks. These are what we call the Russian 66s. Each one's different, very, very different. But if you've got basically like one size wrench and some twine, It'll be okay. You'll be able to make it. You take apart the engine every single day, you put it back together, and we push into the field. When it doesn't work anymore, we go to horseback. These are computer scientists that are with me from my university, graduate students at the time, who were very close friends of mine, who were learning how to ride on wooden saddles. So can you imagine the pain of that, right? So they had been part of this project from the very beginning, and then we're riding across the plains of Mongolia, going from San Diego, where we're surfing, to these wooden saddles in Mongolia. And every single night we would take out all of our gear, we'd unpack, we'd get ready to download all that data, and this is where we lived. Right? These are the Mongolian yurts. You can put them up in a few seconds, well, not a few seconds, like about an hour, if you're an expert, and they keep you very warm and very cozy in the face of what happens every single night, which is these big storms, right? And inside these yurts, as these storms are descending upon us, we're downloading the inputs that everybody online are making from their computers at home, right? We are virtually a moving lab, a moving hot point, right? Inside this yurt, I'd like to welcome you inside now. We are a bunch of smelly guys with a satellite modem. And our satellite modem is collecting new data every single day about what the crowd is saying. Once we've collected that data, we've started to process it, we're looking for those clusters, we try to celebrate. I want to give you guys a little context of what it's like there, because it's such a special, amazing land. Every night we would sing songs with our Mongolian collaborators. We'd get around a campfire. Let me see if I can give you an example of this. They would sing these deep, heartfelt songs, soul-like songs about their past, about their ancestry, about their mothers, about the land, about their traditions, about their horses, right? And then they would ask us to sing, our songs, right? And all we could think of was Thriller. But we connected at a human level, right? And the next morning we'd get up, we'd look at our GPSs, and we would start looking for those data points. So how do you measure agreement? How do you measure agreement? Well, you normalize the number of people who have looked at a video or a piece of imagery. And you can measure it by densities of clusters. Right? So there's a bunch of independent people saying there's something there. And we can measure the density of a cluster as being the level of agreement. That's all we have. Right? So yes, all these people agreed that there's something there. And by just putting that kind of analytics into it, we can start to make a heat map of where agreement is occurring. So you can see for roads and rivers, you get these long linear stretches. Where the roads are red dots, where the rivers are blue dots. I mean, these roads are literally dirt tracks that you can barely make out, but they're being linked up across this entire region. And the yellow dots represent archaeological structures. We're trying to say, okay, by agreement, by consensus, we'll go out by this vote. Now we're trying to take those data points and use all of that agreement and feed a machine learning algorithm so that now it can do this active machine learning cycle where we're saying, okay, well, let's ramp it up and let's have the machine, these algorithms, start to define out even more random questions. But we go to those specific sites, those little yellow dots, and what do we start finding? Things that we had not predicted, right? Things like this 3,000-year-old burial, this Bronze Age Hirixer. Right? In the center of that lies a nomad from 3,000 years ago. And people across the globe were picking these out in satellite imagery. We came across something like this. On a pile of rocks, you can look down. From space, you can look down and you see this little rectangular feature here. These rectangular features represent another tomb. People were picking this out, the tiniest little details that we could not predefine. They were identifying and saying, there's something weird there. I just had this intuition about it. They were making these agreements, and they were finding things across the board, like this deer stone, this carved plaque of a person's experience 3,000 years ago was being observed from space across the globe on people's couches, right? And they were helping. And it didn't matter if you were an expert in archaeology. All that mattered was that you had human intuition and that you participated. These types of things were found all across the entire region, across a broad spectrum. In fact, we found over 55 tombs from the Bronze Age till now across this entire area that hadn't been mapped before. But one thing very peculiar about all of this was that we also were looking for a very specific mountain where we believed that Genghis Khan had been buried. And there was something in an image that was found. If you look at the center of that little image, there's a little dot. Do you see the little dot? Barely. Well, a lot of people saw that little dot, and they agreed there's something weird about that dot. And we knew that there would be a shrine that the shamans had left at this one specific mountain, and it was far away from that valley area. So we went, and we searched through that entire region, and we ended up finding that location. And this is what we found, this large shrine, this huge, massive shrine that had been built by shamans over the years, because they're the only ones that are paying tribute to this mountain still, right? And the people of Mongolia. I mean, they worship this from a distance. Right? I am not allowed to dig in Mongolia, right? The shamans believe that if you disturb the tomb of Genghis Khan, you'll cause a curse that will end the world, as Susan mentioned, and as I mentioned yesterday. So I won't do that, you know, I hope not, right? But what we're trying to do is find knowledge. Knowledge about ourselves, about our past. So we're taking a different approach. We're saying, well, if we can find that needle in a haystack, then can we go from there and try to look without looking? I mean, can we look without digging? Can we do non-invasive surveys? And we started to do that, right? We use ground-penetrating radar, which I spoke a lot about yesterday. We covered the whole area. And I'll very briefly mention to the people who aren't, you know, weren't here yesterday just what we had found. But basically, on the southeast flanks of this mountain, by luck, the storms that knocked us off knocked over these trees, and in the roots of those trees that had fallen down, we found the remains of a massive temple. You see here a brick, a little piece of ceramic. We found hundreds of pounds of ceramics, hundreds of pounds of bricks. We found iron, we found horse bones, we found celadon, ceramics. I mean, things that were remarkable to be in this one remote location, right? And we mapped this out geophysically. What's actually there? So we use ground-penetrating radar, electroresistivity tomography, magnetometry, tools that look into the ground without digging, and we've been able to define now the walls of a building and something solid underneath that we've radiocarbon dated, the bones, the horse pieces that are around it, and we've thermoluminescent dated those ceramics, and they come back to the time of Genghis Khan and his sons and grandsons. It was an incredible experience. I mean, a remarkable feeling of elation, you know, that we had added to this knowledge about the past, that we were giving some piece of data, of actual historical data point back to the world about this one individual who had changed the entire course of our human existence. In fact, 1 in 200 of you are related to Genghis Khan today, which meant that you know, he wasn't such a bad, mean fighter all the time. He was also a very charismatic, you know, suave individual. No, maybe not. I shouldn't say that. But anyway. But basically what I'm saying is that we don't know anything about this person, and hopefully this will start to add to that. So what do you do after a moment like that, right? I mean, after a moment of discovery like that? Well, we wrestle, we go, we undertake the experiences of the Mongolian countryside, and we play soccer with our Mongolian collaborators, and we think about all the people who have helped along the way, right? All of these individuals that had participated, that had taken part in this search. In part, they were defining the unknown. They were reasoning with each other because we could not predefine what we were looking for. There was no expert. There wasn't an example. We just used our human intuition together as a team. All you need is a lot of people, right? A problem, which could be saving lives, as Patrick mentioned, and a team to go out and ground truth, right? That's what we wanted to do. So data and a challenge. It could be anything. What is that problem going to be? What are we doing with the future, right? That's what Patrick mentioned earlier. I started a small group from all the graduate students who had graduated. They were very close friends of mine. You know, the brains behind all of the servers and everything that was put into this, the actual mechanics of it all. And together we formed a company called TomNod, which we've gone on to do work you know, with Patrick and his team. That TomNod group you know, looks at things from disasters to, you know, for example, what you had mentioned earlier with Syria, you know, moments of human mobilization. And we're trying to use that same process. Kind of closer to home, more recently, I wasn't sure if I was going to even bring this up, but I felt it appropriate. You know, I recently, a couple of weeks ago, I don't know if anybody saw in the news, there was a couple of climbers that got lost in Peru. These were incredibly close friends of mine, right? One of them I had climbed with, you know, throughout my entire career. And what we did was we put online a search with real-time satellite imagery for our friends who'd been lost in these snow tracks. We had no idea what we were going to find. We have no idea where they are. We have no idea what the scenario was. How are we going to try to even look for them, right? And by people participating, very quickly we saw tracks. And unfortunately, those tracks led us to what we didn't want to find. But at least we have them home now, right? So when you can't define what you're looking for, you can use collective reasoning. You can work together. You can create knowledge. You can answer questions. On a lighter note, why do we care about knowledge? Why do we care about this? Why are we even here? You know, I got down to it at a fundamental level when I was trying to make this talk. So what is the point of sharing information and technology and data? And I came across this, Socrates at one point, right? I mean, I got all the way to Socrates. And it said, the highest good any human can be is happy, right? You just want to be happy. Knowledge, virtue, and wisdom provides a man with the ability to reason out the correct choices that will lead to happiness. So we can work together to reason out those choices, right? But the highest knowledge is self-knowledge, what brings you to happiness. And so with these choices, as our swarm moves around the universe and we start to make these interconnected choices, we should figure out what's going to make us happy. Because just being connected like this doesn't necessarily mean that you're more happy. And I don't know if this guy is more happy. He's the most connected guy I could find on the internet. But he seems to be pretty happy. And if Socrates killed himself, so maybe it was a good measure. We've come a long way since we became, once we became interconnected. But I think in a very real basis, what I'm trying to say is that we have the power now to work together. And we're trying to find the mechanisms that allow us to work together in very, very interconnected ways. And the frontier of this could be a conscious internet. And that could be something that allows us to try to define our own happiness or our own destruction. So, with that, I thank you for the time, and I'm going to pass it over to a very inspirational person for me, a person who, in a lot of ways, inspired me to be a part of the National Geographic Society. Actually, you're probably going to introduce him, right? So, but this person is going to tell us where we all came from. Thank you.
Albert.